So again, welcome everybody to this Legends panel where we get to discuss or talk about topics of euphonium, brass playing, brass pedagogy, and career advice with three of our outstanding euphonium legends. We have as guests today Luke Spiros, former principal euphonium of the President's Own United States Marine Band; Earle Lauder, Dr. Earle Lauder, former principal euphonium of the Navy Band; and of course Colonel Michael Colburn, who is former principal euphonium and, of course, former 27th director of the United States Marine Band. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to just give a quick bio on each of these gentlemen, just so you can know a little bit of their background. It'll be very brief, but I think it's important before we start the discussion. I'm monitoring the chat function. If you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to type them in, and if we get time, we'll go ahead and switch over to the chat, and I'll read your questions out to these three fantastic musicians. So let's start with Dr. Lauder. As I mentioned, Earle Lauder was principal euphonium and euphonium soloist with the United States Navy Band for 12 years. He is also head of the euphonium sections of the 46th Infantry Division National Guard Band, Keith Bryan's New Sousa Band, the Blossom Music Center Festival Band in Cleveland, the George Foreman's New Columbian Brass Band, and Leonard Smith's famous Detroit Concert Band. He received his undergraduate degree from Michigan State, where he studied with the great Leonard Falcone. He completed his doctoral work at Florida State University, becoming the very first euphonium player ever to earn a doctorate in euphonium performance. After his career with the Navy Band, Earle spent 27 years as a professor of euphonium at Morehead State University in Kentucky. And certainly Earle is one of the great soloists and educators of euphonium in our time. Luke Spiros, as I said, served as euphoniumist with the President's Own United States Marine Band from 1969 to 1987 and was appointed principal euphonium chair and soloist in 1974. He grew up in Massachusetts. He attended Boston University as a music student before enlisting in the Marine Corps in 1962. That's a separate story. His main teacher and mentor on the euphonium was Aaron Harris. And if you don't know that name, younger euphonium students, Aaron Harris was one of the last members of John Philip Sousa's euphonium section in John Philip Sousa's band. And Aaron Harris's teacher was Simone Mantilla. After retirement, he's played and taught at places like Frederick College, the Virginia Grand Military Band, and the annual Allegheny Band Camp in Pennsylvania. Along with Brian Bowman and many other professional euphonium players of his generation, Luke made it his mission during his years in the Marine Band to visit college campuses across the country and to promote the instrument to young players. And I can speak for myself, and I think also for Colonel Colburn, that this effort bore tremendous fruit in the 80s and 90s, and I think continues to bear fruit to this day. And last but certainly not least, Colonel Michael Colburn, originally from St. Albans, Vermont. He attended SUNY Potsdam as well as Arizona State University for his undergraduate degree, studying primarily with Daniel Parentoni at ASU. He joined the euphonium section of the President's Own in 1987. Coincidentally, it was upon the retirement of Luke Spiros from the section. And like Earle and Luke, Colonel Colburn was a frequent soloist with the Marine Band and was appointed principal euphonium in 1990. A year later, he earned a master's degree in conducting from George Mason University in Virginia. And in 1993, he released the Golden Age of Brass Volume 3 recording, which included some of the seminal recordings of cornerstone works from the Golden Age of euphonium, such as All Those Enduring Young Charms, Auld Lang Syne. In 1996, Mike was offered the job as one of the assistant directors of the Marine Band, and in 2004, he became the 27th director of the President's Own and chief musical advisor to the White House. He retired in 2014 and is now the director of bands and professor of euphonium at Butler University in Indiana. So that's a little bit of the background of these three exceptional musicians. So what I'd like to do, gentlemen, if I may, is I'd like to start off with talking about your teachers. Each of you have had really exceptional teachers that have made significant contributions to our instrument and to the brass world in general. So starting with Earle. Earle, can you tell us a little bit about how Leonard Falcone was as a teacher, his methods, and how his teaching methods helped you as a student?
Oh, thank you. That's a good question. Can you all hear me now? All right.
Yep,
Okay.
we can hear you great.
All right. Thank you. Uh, Leonard Falcone was a unique individual in the time that he spent there at Michigan State, both as the director of bands there for 40 years before he retired, and then kept on teaching. And my time with him, I'll just put it this way: the more I did, the more he gave me. The more he gave me, the more I did. That it was just one of those things that was just a mushroom, and working with him was so great. I just was in such admiration of the man himself. I heard him play when I was in high school on the baritone horn, and I just was amazed at the accuracy and the musicality that he had. Now, his teaching techniques are sort of what I call the backdoor teaching technique, and that is that instead of just working on, let's say, technical things, little technical things that are indigenous to our instrument itself, such as the valve combinations and getting your things in line in terms of the mechanics of the playing. When I say backdoor teaching, it was this. I remember coming into his office one time, and I was having a hard time making the low notes just speak easy. And I would lock up is what I would do. I would take a breath, and then I'd start to blow, but it would lock up and I couldn't get it out. And so he said, So he walked over to his desk. He picked up a pencil, a long pencil, actually. He came over and got in front of me, and he said, now, I want you to play that. It was a low F, by the way, which isn't very low nowadays, but it was a low F that day. And I was just having trouble with just not popping it. And so he picked up the pencil. He picked it up like a conductor, and he brought his hand up and brought it down, and I played. He says, I don't see any problem. It was one of those things that I was thinking of the wrong thing. I was thinking about how hard it was to get that note out, rather than to just take a breath, let it go, and play that note. It was interesting. The other reason I call it a backdoor teaching, and I've used this through my teaching experience at Morehead State University, and that is let the music dictate what the problem is, rather than looking at the music and starting to play it and say, oh, I'm going to have a problem with this. Let the music dictate what's there. Just pick up your horn, take your breath naturally, and let it flow naturally, and play. And then when you run into some little thing that is a little problem area, address it as part of the music. In other words, are you maintaining the airflow through what you're playing? Are you thinking of the flow rather than the mechanics of the notes? And I've used that theory, and it works. I'm not saying that there aren't other ways of doing it. That's the way I did it, because that's the way I learned it from Mr. Falcone.
Thank you very much. So, Luke, let's shoot this over to you. So, Aaron Harris was one of your mentors and great teachers, and of course, as I mentioned before, he was a student of Simon Mantilla. Can you tell us a little bit about his methodology in terms of how he taught you and how it helped you as a student?
Sure can. I was a student of Brookline High School. My very good teacher, his name was Herb Philpott, and he said, I can't teach anymore. See this guy up in Lynn, Massachusetts. I said, who is he? He says, Aaron Harris. He was a side partner to Simone Mantilla in the Sousa Band. I said, oh. So I didn't have much money back then. Got on a trolley, went about 17 miles up to Lynn, Massachusetts, on this little house, 9 Cherry Street. I still remember the address. And I walked in there, and he was sitting in his living room with a double Band Euphonium and a trombone and a tuba there. And the minute I sat down, he whipped out this book, Aaron Harris, Advanced Trumpet Etudes, which to this day, that book is a prerequisite for all advanced trumpet players at Curtis. And hey, it's called treble clef, Mr. Harris. You know, read it. You know, we went another story. Anyway, I asked why he wrote that book in treble clef. Doing in bass clef. There were many people around reading bass clef. on euphonium at that time. So he would take me through that very methodically. Long tones were his great. Before your lesson started, you'd have about 15 minutes of long tones. The softer you can play it, the louder you can play it, back and forth, and take the horn off your face for 10 minutes. And after that session, your face was so itchy, you wanted to play these long, soft tones. You're already really warmed up. And he would go through these etudes, which were tremendously difficult, not diatonic at all. They went all over the place, with intervals and everything else. And he was a very strict teacher. He explained himself very well. He couldn't play at his age anymore, but he'd pick up the horn. Not a very good sound, but all these notes were not in his style. You could hear it. And I did very well with him. He liked me. Football at the same time over at Brookline High School. That interfered sometimes. The greatest thing that I admired about him, I did a lesson one day, sat down after playing. He said, "You haven't practiced this week enough." I said, "No, sir." He said, "Get out." And in those, the teacher, you did what he told you. I was furious when he walked toward the door, and to add insult upon injury, he asked me for the $5 before I left. That was the perfect lesson. But he's very strict, and probably on the way back home, all I could do is say all these terrible things to myself. I'll get him next time. Next time I go for my lesson, he's really going to hear it. I'm going to fix him. He gave you this incentive, and he had a lot of many things in his office that inspired you. I went there one time. This great big man sitting there. Bill Bell was a buddy of his, and Frank Simon was a buddy of his, and they were all over his house all the time. I didn't know who these men were. And they look at Aaron and say, "Who's the kid?" Not bad, So. But I learned later in life. I was very fortunate to be brought up in the Boston area, played with many good bands. Through the references of Aaron Harris, Walter Smith Band was there, the Old Pryor Band, all the old timers were still around, and I was just a young fellow that they'd take in and rip through these transcriptions, which I think today most of the young people don't have that access to themselves. But that was Aaron Harris, inspired you that way.
All right, thanks, Luke. Colonel Colburn, can you tell us about how Daniel Perantoni, what his method was and how it helped you basically at that part? We've talked about this, you and I, before, about how it really was a little bit unconventional to you at the time, but how it really helped you at that point in your student career.
Yeah, so I transferred out to Arizona State as a junior. I'd done a couple of years at the Crane School of Music in upstate New York, studied with Peter Popeil there, and Dr. Popeil is a really very fine tuba player and teacher. But his approach was fairly conventional. And at that point, I'd really decided I wanted to pursue a professional performance career, if at all possible. So I applied and was accepted to study with Mr. P out of Arizona State, won a scholarship out there. Was a young kid from northern Vermont. The farthest west I had been at that point in my life was New York State. So when I stepped off the plane in Phoenix, Arizona, it was about 120 degrees, and it was surrounded by rocks. I felt like I was on another planet, just a real life experience. But there were a couple of aspects of Mr. P's approach that I'd like to talk about. And the first was his emphasis on the basics. And when I say the basics, the only thing Mr. Perantoni let me do my entire first semester there was to sing, buzz on a mouthpiece, and play very simple melodies. So the art of phrasing in the Arbin book, 150 basically, simple tunes and operatic arias, but nothing more than like an octave and a half, right in the meat and potatoes register. Sing, buzz, play, sing, buzz, play. That's all he would let me do. And I remember about halfway through the first semester of doing this, I said, "Mr. P, how am I ever going to win a job with one of the military bands if all you're letting me do is sing, buzz, and play? How am I going to have the technique to win one of these jobs?" And he said, Mike, you've already got more technique than you need to win one of those jobs. You've got technique coming out of your ears, but if you don't sound good, your tone isn't good, and you can't play a phrase musically, you're never going to make it past the first round. And I thought, well, I came all the way across country from Vermont to Arizona to study with this guy, and I should listen to his advice, right? And so I just doubled down and did exactly what he asked me to do. And he really did reshape me, not just as a euphonium player, but as a musician. He really taught me how to shape a phrase, how to think about the tone quality, making sure every single note of the scale of the melody matches each other, that it's all not just intonationally consistent, but tonally consistent. And most importantly, that I knew how to shape a phrase. And that's training actually that influenced me not only as a euphonium player, but even as a conductor. To this day, when I'm studying a score, and if I'm looking at a melody and I'm just trying to figure out, well, what do I want to do with this? I'll pick up my horn and play through it. And those techniques and tools that I developed with Mr. P really have benefited me, not just as a euphonium player, but really as a conductor, as a teacher. I mean, these are the same techniques that I use with my students as well. But the other aspect about Mr. Parentoni that was really different for me was that once I got past that first semester and we started doing other etudes and working on solos, that kind of thing, he left it entirely in my hands. I would show up for a lesson and he'd say, so what are we working on this week, Mike? And nothing was assigned. He left it entirely in my hands to work on what I needed to work on. Now, if I was having a certain problem or something, he might recommend a certain book or a certain solo. But week after week, he just left it in my hands. And his attitude was, it's your future, it's your career. What do you want to do with this time? And that was just, I was so used to the technique of, you get assigned X number of etudes every week and, we check it off and you go on to the next thing. And so this really kind of open approach to becoming a better musician was really kind of a shock to my system. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the approach that he would take with every student, but I think he felt like I was mature enough and I developed enough that he could trust me to kind of steer things in the direction they needed to go in, and that he was there to kind of really coach me and develop me as a musician. But those were two aspects of his teaching that have always really stayed with me, and I think have benefited me to this day.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think Daniel Parentoni's teaching is, one of the other principal euphonium players of the Marine Band, Phil Frankie, was also a Parentoni student, and he's talked to me a lot about Dan's teaching from that perspective as well. Just a very intuitive musical approach to teaching rather than more of a technical approach, and I think it's a fantastic point to bring out. So let's go on to the next question, if we could. I think that the next one that I have down here that I'd like the panel to talk about is that all three of you have had enormous collective experience on audition panels, whether they are for hiring military musicians to military band, solo competition panels, or even at a university level. So I would like to, if you could talk to the students here in this discussion forum about what you think, in your opinion, a military band audition panel is looking for, both musically and even away from the instrument, when they are listening and interviewing candidates for a military job. Of course, military band jobs are, one of the only and the most popular venues for euphonium players. So let's start with Dr. Lauder again. And if you could talk to us just about what your experience has been in terms of being on a panel and what a panel looks for a potential joinee for a military band.
Well, it's been a long time since I've
Well, and it can also be, you can also draw experience from your time on at the Falcone Festival as a judge, for a solo competition too.
well, let me go through the actual audition process in terms of the military bands. When I auditioned to get in the band, the Navy band, believe it or not, I was one of maybe 3 people that auditioned for the position.
Wow.
Quite different than what we're doing today.
Yes.
Through the auspices of TUBA and all of the different groups that have come together and shared knowledge of playing. We now have a lot more, let's say, capable young men and women who are ready to actually audition and could probably play in the band if they were chosen or someone else chosen. They may not, but I just remember that I went in and I felt kind of lonesome in there because I went down to Washington and auditioned, and the panel was mainly the wind players, mainly the brass players, and a couple of woodwind players as well. And you know what they were looking for, and I can say quite bluntly, and it knocked me flat on my rear end, to coin a phrase. They didn't want to know if I could play tomorrow. They wanted to know if I could play today. Therefore, when they put something up in front of me, their expectation was for me to play it now and play the right rhythms, play the right, let's say, the dynamics, play the right style, everything. And that's what they were interested in. And I'm sure they're interested in that now. When you go into a group like this, my first concert I played, there was no rehearsal. We didn't have time because I got in during the day and the concert was that night and I had a rehearsal in the morning, and I had no chance of playing it. So I had to just look over the book visually, and we got to the concert. I played the part. And that's basically what I wanted to share with most of you taking the audition process. Do a lot of reading. If you are anywhere near a band library, go in, check out the euphonium parts. And a lot of times they have them already isolated, so you can pick out the euphonium parts and have them in a book and read them. Because that's what's going to count for you, is not how pretty I can play right tomorrow or in a month or in 2 months, but how accurate I can play now.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Luke, you want to weigh in? Go unmute yourself, Luke.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
A lot what Earle said. Pretty much what Earle has said. It nails it. With the Marine Band, it was a little different. They were when people came in, they would go through a psychological test. When I was there, I don't know if it's still happening. To question the person, to question the attitude that person would have toward the job and the military. And like I say, echoing much of what Earle has been spoken to, our auditions were pretty not as strict or as large and long as now. I think I auditioned about 3 or 4 people. One was Theo, and I can't remember the other 2 names, but what they had to do is just go. We put them behind the screen, and I could tell a good player. I could hear all these people warming up, and there would be 50 of them upstairs in the higher band room, all trying to outblow each other, psychologically impress each other with technique. And what impressed me the most is the way one euphonium player would play the Star Spangled Banner. That's all I had to hear. Dum, da, dum. That's how he phrased and how beautifully he played that, and what kind of sound. That'll pretty much tell you what kind of musician you have, regardless of lots of notes and everything, how a musician phrases a nice, slow melodic piece. And of course, behind the screen, you could really hear that. I don't know if it's the same now. We had all our players, not just me, but solo cornet and tuba and trombone, all sitting on a panel with a couple of the directors, and we'd all listen behind the screen. Even if you knew a person, you didn't have to worry about politics. It's totally apolitical, based totally on talent and what you heard coming from behind that screen. And I was always the one who was choosing the audition pieces. Most of them were lyrical. I played poet. It's one little lick of Poet and Peasant I had. I don't know if you've run through that over there, Mark. And there was a very, very slow melodic thing. I always pulled that. And that gave the players the worst time. More than Cimarron Overture or any of these other technical pieces. So I judge it on that. I just, I suggest that you play with a beautiful sound, a melodic, and that also would enhance your ability to play technical passages and makes your embouchure stronger. And that's my point on it all.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And over to you, to Colonel Colburn. And if you could also talk about, since in full disclosure, everybody, Colonel Colburn's the one that hired me for this job that I'm currently in. So I'm grateful to him for that. If you could also discuss a little bit as a commanding officer what you looked for away from the instrument in terms of interviewees on the instrument as you went through the audition process too, including the playing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many auditions I have heard. First in my role as principal euphonium, and then as an assistant director, and then as director. And one of the responses that I often heard from people who unsuccessfully auditioned mostly for the Marine Band, usually with a little bit of an edgy tone in their voice, was the question, so what were you looking for anyway? That clearly they couldn't figure out that they had played so well, they couldn't imagine why we hadn't hired them. And looking at my notes, what I realized in most of the cases when I got this question, these people were not anywhere near as close to winning the audition as they thought they were in their mind. That they convinced themselves, oh, if I'd only hit that high B flat, or if I'd only played this passage a little faster, I would have won the job. When in fact, they just had not done their homework. And when I say doing your homework, most auditions these days consist of a series of excerpts. For almost any audition, you're going to get a packet of excerpts, whether this is an orchestral audition or a band audition. And excerpts are not the same as etudes. You can prepare an etude all by yourself in a practice room, just shaping the phrase and trying to make it sound as musical as you can make it sound. But when we're on an audition listening to someone playing an excerpt, we're trying to make sure that you know how that music is supposed to go as if you were playing it with the band. That when you're playing an excerpt from the whole suite, the Stars and Stripes Forever, from Granger, Lincolnshire Posy, that you have some sense of how your part fits in with everyone else. Ideally, you will have played that music in a band, but even if you haven't, you could listen to a recording, you could play that excerpt with a recording, you can study. Or there's so many things that you can do to make sure that when you play, it sounds as though you know how your part fits into the whole piece. And I remember when I was director of the band, we hosted a CBDNA regional conference, and we had Phil Smith from the New York Philharmonic come down, and we did a mock audition panel. And it was amazing to me to talk to him and to go through that process and realize all the things that we were listening for in a Marine Band audition were exactly the same as what they were listening for in a New York Phil audition. And again, it's that idea of you knowing how your part fits in the whole, because especially as a conductor, I want to hire a player who's not just thinking like a soloist all the time, but someone who is truly an ensemble player. I mean, this is one of the things I love about the Marine Band, is that everyone in that band is a world-class solo type of player. But they also understand the need to kind of check their ego at the door and realize that once they come into the organization, they need to adjust and adapt and listen to what's going on around them. So that's something that we're listening for, even when you're playing that excerpt all by yourself in the audition. So do your homework, make sure that you're playing all the right notes, you're playing at the assigned tempo, that you've listened to how your part fits in, and that you've really paid attention to those details. That's first and foremost. Then, as Luke said, you got to play with a beautiful tone. And as Earle said, you also need to be able to sight read. I mean, these are all things that are also important, but it really starts with making sure that you have done your homework. Make sure that you record yourself. When you're getting ready for that audition, go through the process of playing these excerpts in a different sequence. Don't always play them in the same order, because you don't know what order you're going to have to play in the audition. And you don't want anything to surprise you. You want to make sure that you're ready for any kind of contingency. Practice playing behind a screen, practice playing in front of people who are chewing gum and drinking coffee and talking to each other with all the distractions you could possibly imagine, because you want to make sure that you're bulletproof. When you walk into that audition, the ceiling could fall in, and it's not going to keep you from playing your audition exactly the way that you've prepared to do that. So just a couple of thoughts about, the approach to take. And then Mark, I think you also asked about kind of the extra musical aspects. Is
Yeah,
that
just because we never talk about this, the interview portion of it and how much, I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about, how much bearing that has on an audition process that no one really sees or thinks about because they're so focused on the musical portion.
right? So like in a Marine Band audition, the first thing you do is prove yourself musically, right? The first round is behind a screen. In general, that second round is they're going to take the screen down unless there's some other reason that it needs to stay up. So that's why you be prepared to play behind a screen and then also looking at a panel of people who honestly may not look like they're all that interested in what you're doing, and you don't want to be distracted by that. But then there is, once you've proven yourself musically, there is going to be an interview part of this audition. You're going to sit down with perhaps the executive officer or another officer who's been assigned to interview and ask you questions about your background, because of course, to the band, you have to be enlistable in that branch of the military, and you also may need to get a White House security clearance, which is the case with the president's own. And so you're going to be asked a bunch of questions that have nothing to do with how many hours you practice or how well you sight read, but really have to do with your background. And so you want to be prepared to answer those questions professionally. Honestly, and remember that every element, as soon as you set foot into that building, there's a potential for you to be evaluated as cooperatively as you possibly can, because ideally we want to hire the best person for the job. And of course, first and foremost is the music, but we also want to hire the person who's going to fit in well with the section, who's going to fit in well with the organization. So it's important, I would recommend that you do a little homework on the organization. And this is true for any job interview. I can't tell you how many interviews I've sat in on, both in the military and now in the college environment, where I feel like the person who's interviewing for this job didn't do any homework about the institution. And, that really means something to a potential employer, that you've done a little bit of research to find out exactly what this organization is about, what the history of the organization is. Of course, with the Marine Band, there's a rich history that goes way, way back to the, John Philip Sousa and beyond. So it's important to do a little homework, understand something about the history of the institution that you're hoping is going to hire you. But most importantly, remember that every second, every moment that you're in that building, you are potentially being evaluated for the job in one way or another.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think we underestimate how much first impressions count in the music world, especially when you're going in for an audition. And Colonel Colburn can testify, and I'm sure Luke and Earle have been in those situations too, that despite how good a player is, if they make a bad impression or if they say the wrong thing at the wrong time, it can be something that's really difficult to get over for a panel for whatever reason. So all good things to remember, both in terms of playing and outside of that. Let's go on to the next question. So what I wanted to focus on now is just how each of you three have had careers as professional euphonium players, but each of you have kind of had different roads in terms of how that has played out in your own personal lives. So I was wondering if you could talk to the people here in the discussion and give them advice. Let's say to a student who's college age, who wants to have a career as a military band euphoniumist and or a college teacher of euphonium or low brass. What advice could you three give them from your own personal experience, from how it's happened in your own life, that might help them in terms of being prepared to be marketable and to be realistic in pursuing that type of career? And Luke, we can start with you.
Okay, this probably dwells on pretty much the way something clicks, in your life. You go through school and you finally realize what you want to do. Believe it or not, I wanted to be a pharmacist. And I was playing in the high school band. I was playing first chair in the high school band and first chair 4 years straight in the all-state band of Massachusetts. And I didn't think that was a big deal, but they said it was. And I realized what I wanted to do is one day the Marine Band came to Boston, played at the Donnelly Memorial Theater, and Colonel Chopin was conducting, and I sat in that auditorium, and I had been playing in many bands up there at the time, and I had never heard anything so dynamic in my life. And that clicked right in. I said, "This is what I want to do." So I just that determined. It's something that most students want to do. You want to be a teacher. Everything else. Actually, when I went to Boston University, they did not have an applied euphonium course, and I pushed on that, and I started that with John Coffey, who was a bass trombone player with the symphony up in Boston, also my trombone teacher. But I realized then that I wanted to be in music, and I studied in performance, not music education. I just wanted to be a performer. And at that time, the board at the college during the audition said, "Why do you want to study applied euphonium?" Well, actually, young people, you really have to know what you want to do with your life. I said, "Because I want to be in one of the service bands." And that was my choice, and it worked out. And that's how it started for me, and I never regretted a day of it. I enjoyed the military very much, all of it, to a point.
So Luke, so after you left the band, though, you've told me that you had the option of becoming a band director up at Shepherdstown University, but you turned that down because you wanted to go a completely different path into computer programming. Is that correct?
Yeah, what happened on the Marine Band tours, and I don't know if any witnesses are still alive, but I would be on that bus on the Marine Band tours that I would build Heathkit televisions, and I'd build computers. I studied programming on the road, but I just did that as a hobby. And then when I got out, I was offered this job at Shepherd's University for $17,000 a year, and having to also conduct football games and arrange that with the kids, and that was for 17. And I just, for kicks, saw an ad. They wanted a network administrator for Lerner Corporation in Washington. It started off with $120K a year, and I took
That's a little bit better than 17,000.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was a job. It was 24/7. It was a very stressful job. You had to keep the company running. They run all of Washington, D.C. and Maryland, Virginia property developers. But at the same time, I was always playing. I mean, I had plenty of time to play. What else can I do? When you're a full-time musician, you're a full-time professional when you're being paid for playing euphonium. There I was one time, the highest paid euphonium player in the world with my E9 rank, and then that was good. But when you get out, there's nothing there. So this helped. My civilian life is just as competitive as the military, and it's all about competition too, a healthy competition, and it worked out for me.
Great. Well, thank you. Earle, do you want to chime in on the advice that you might have for a college-age student that might want to follow the same footsteps that you did?
Excuse me. Now you can probably hear me.
Yep.
Yes, I would like to chime in. Number one, I'd like to go back and address the reason why I wanted to get into one of the military bands. And it goes back to when I was a senior, actually, at Michigan State University studying with Mr. Falcone. Well, it appears on a Saturday that I was teaching private lessons at Owasso, Michigan, which was about 30 some miles away from Lansing. And so I was gone for the weekend. And when I got back on Monday morning to take my lesson with Mr. Falcone, I'm sorry, I call him Mr. Falcone. He deserves very well the title Dr. Falcone. But when I knew him, the term of endearment was Mr. Falcone. I would never, ever call him by his first name. But anyway, I came back in on Monday morning to take my lesson. And I walked in the door, and I set up my music and everything to get ready. He was doing something at his desk. And he looked up at me and he says, "Earle," he said, and he says in that Italian broke. He said, "Earle," he says, "I want you to contact this number." He handed me a telephone number. and set up an audition with the Navy Band in Washington, D.C. And I was knocked off my props. I looked back at him and I said, Mr. Falcone, I said, I'm not the caliber of musician that, should play in a group like that. And he looked back at me again. He didn't say anything else, but I want you to call that number and set up an audition for the Navy Band. He didn't give me any out at all. And I kind of him hard. He says, I want you, and his voice raised up, to call that number and set up an audition. And what had happened was on the Saturday, the Navy Band had played in Lansing, and he was asked to come out and guest conduct the band in one or two numbers, which he did. And evidently it really impressed him, the caliber, the musicianship, everything about the band at that time. And he had found out that Harold Brash, whose position actually I came in for that opening, I should say, and had just retired just a little bit before that. And they were looking for another euphonium player. And I had no idea that I would ever even be asked to come to that band and play. When I did hear the band, I'll have to interject this. The first rehearsal or so that I got in the band, I couldn't play a note. I heard all of these beautiful sounds coming from around me. You notice I didn't say technical sounds, beautiful musical sounds coming from all around me. And I just absorbed what I heard. And I was actually set as assistant principal to Lonnie Leard, who was at that time the principal after, after the opening, came about, and Harold had retired. But you never know what will stimulate you into doing something in your life. And I don't look at it as maybe it was just something that happened, And I look at it that somebody was guiding me. And I have to say, I'm a very firm believer in my God. And I think it was through him that he was guiding my, let's say, situation into a portion that I'd be ready to go and be with the Navy Band. It was just something that I look back on now and I kind of shiver. But I'm sure glad it happened.
After the Navy Band, you got out and you became a professor. So what made you want to do that, and what advice could you give young students who might be looking towards that type of career as a college level professor?
Well, I tell you, my original thought when I was going through Michigan State as an undergraduate was that I wanted to actually be a high school band director. That was my goal, because I so idolized my high school band director, Russell Williams, who was from Michigan area, had come down to Norfolk, Virginia, and taught the high school where I was. I so idolized him. It's amazing. He was a clarinetist, but he was so well schooled in the basic fundamentals of all of the instruments themselves that he was capable of teaching those instruments, even though he would demonstrate what he was talking to me about on the clarinet. And the musicianship that was coming out of that horn, I just thought the clarinet was a long black stick, But who's on the other end really makes the difference in terms of, are you playing music or are you playing notes? And Michael, I'm so glad you said that a while ago about the fact that it's not just how many notes you play in an hour or in 10 minutes or in 1 minute. It's how musical those notes are when they come out, whether they're technical or whether they are just musically melodic expression. I have to tell you, Mr. Falcone, when I got to Michigan State, his background was one of opera, Italian opera. And when he heard, when he heard a musical statement, he wanted to hear a full-blown melody. He did not want to hear, short little burps of notes that he couldn't quite equate with. If I may, I want to share with you something that very anecdotally, but one day Mr. Falcone was conducting at a rehearsal, and he was conducting one of the Pussycat pieces, and I don't know if you know, back in the 50s and 60s, there was an experiment in, like say, not giving you the whole melody, but giving you part of it here, that part of it here, the rest of it here, you know, and not connecting it together. And that kind of blew his mind because he wanted to hear the operatic aria approach. And so we were conducting this, and in rehearsal, all of a sudden he cut off the band. He grabbed his baton and he laid it down gently on his stand. He looked up and he crossed his arms and said, "You know," he said, "this music is like alphabet soup." He said, "All the letters are there, but they don't spell anything." And I thought that was a good feeling of expressing his idea that he really wanted to hear the operatic melody in its complete form, which you hardly ever got. That's just a little anecdotal thing that you put in, but it made sense.
Absolutely.
And the fact of what we're talking about here, of playing with a beautiful sound, of the beautiful expression, of the style that you're playing in. And I'll tell you what, I'm a singer as well. And I emulate or try to emulate two styles in my playing. One is the vocal approach, and two is the string approach. Because the, what I would call the continuity of the voice and the continuity of the string style is one if you can just emulate in your style as well, especially the vocal style. You're going to play some beautiful melodies and some that everybody can equate to.
Thank you very much for that. And Colonel Colburn, let's put it over to you. So you've had a fascinating career in that you started out as a euphonium player, a principal euphonium soloist, then a conductor, and then now you retired, and now you are a conductor and a euphonium teacher at a great university. So if you could offer some advice just in terms of how you prepared for that, how you set yourself up for success, so some of the students might be able to, get some tips.
Yeah, Mark, and I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, as you might imagine. But I do want to start with just a little bit of a personal story because it involves one of our other legends here, and that is how I even became aware of the possibility that I could play my euphonium for a living. So back when I was in 8th grade, I was at a summer brass camp at the University of Vermont, which is very close to where I live. And one of the guest clinicians was Luke Spiros, a name that I didn't know at all at the time. And I was still playing on a little 3-valve Conn bell front baritone horn, and was just starting to show a little bit of promise as a musician, but still very, very, very naive, very undeveloped. And I was here at this summer brass camp, and I remember there was one of the students, I think Luke, you may have brought him up there. He was playing on a beautiful compensating euphonium, which I'd never seen, and he wore gloves because he didn't want to get any fingerprints on the finish, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is this, And so I felt very much outclassed, but Luke was such a gentleman and so supportive and so encouraging that I just had the time of my life, at the camp that week. And that was really where I first had the idea that, hey, maybe I'd like to play euphonium for a living. I didn't decide on the spot, but that's kind of where the seed was planted. And so I went through high school and became more and more interested in playing euphonium, and started out at the Crane School of Music in upstate New York as a music education major. Even though at that point I knew I wanted to perform, my father was a band director. The advice I was getting from the people at the school was, yes, we understand you want to perform, but it'd be really smart for you to get music education degree as well, which is advice that I give all the time. And I love the idea of teaching. I mean, that's what I do now. So I was certainly not opposed to that. But what I found my first couple of years at Crane was that I was very serious about my music education classes, to the extent that I felt like I didn't have as much time to practice as I really felt I needed if I was going to have a shot at having a career. And so I actually changed my major from music education to music performance without telling my parents, which is not something I'm very proud of to this day. But about 2 months into my sophomore year, when I changed to music performance, I called my father up and I had to confess, this was just killing me that I hadn't told my parents. And I said, I really want to pursue this performance thing with every ounce of energy that I've got. And my promise to you is that if I do this and it doesn't work out, that I will go back and I'll be certified and get certified, and I'll be the most dedicated band director you've ever met. And my father said, clearly you've given this a lot of thought, and you wouldn't have done this unless you really felt like it's what you needed to do. And he was supportive, and I give him great credit to this day for being willing to let me pursue my dreams. So that's when I transferred out to Arizona State to study with Dan Parentoni, and I studied with Dan for I was in my 3rd year of study. So I finished my undergraduate degree. It was in my 1st year of graduate study. And I'd been waiting this whole time for an audition to open up, because as any of us who have pursued playing euphonium professionally know, the auditions the openings are very sporadic. You just never know when there's going to be an opening. And finally, my 3rd year of study, there was an opening, and lo and behold, it was the Marine Band. And I thought, wow, this is perfect. This is the band I've always wanted to play in. So I show up for the audition and find out there's not just 1, but 2 vacancies. And so I think, whoa, I've just doubled my chances, right? How can I miss? So I take the audition, and guess who came in 3rd? I mean, I played a really good audition, felt very good about the whole thing. I had a couple of curveballs myself in the audition, but I felt like I dealt with them. But I came in 3rd, and I thought, well, that may have been my only chance to ever play professionally. And so I went back to school, and was working at that point on a master's degree in euphonium and bass trombone performance. I felt like I needed to diversify my skill set a little bit, so I added bass trombone. And about 2 months later, I was still at school. I was actually with a brass quintet at the Fish-Off competition in Indiana, and I get a call from my wife, who said she had gotten a call from Denny Carroll, who was the executive officer for the Marine Band at the time, and he told her that they decided to add another position to the euphonium section and wanted to know if I was still interested. And so I felt like I just gotten hit with a lucky stick, right? I mean, how did I get this lucky break? And I often tell people, I'm one of the only people you're ever going to meet who got into the Marine Band without winning an audition. I actually came in 3rd, but I played well enough that I made an impression on the directors, and they decided to offer me the position. So I came to the band June of 1987, and after a couple of years was promoted to principal euphonium, had great success as a euphonium player in the band, and again, just felt like I'd gotten my dream job. Not only had I gotten into the band, but I was promoted to principal euphonium. I was playing solos all the time. I was having the time of my life. But I decided, I knew the Marine Band wasn't going to last forever. And I thought, it'd be a good idea to get a master's degree in something other than euphonium performance. And I knew the band director out at George Mason University, which is very close to Washington, D.C., a gentleman by the name of Tony Maiella, who I'd played for before earlier in my college career. And so I called Tony up and said, hey, would you be willing to take me on as a graduate conducting student? And thankfully he did. And so while I was playing principal euphonium in the Marine Band, I was simultaneously working on a graduate degree in conducting. But it was never with the idea that I would conduct in the Marine Band. This was simply just to diversify my skill set so that someday when I was looking for a college job, I thought in addition to teaching euphonium, perhaps I could be hired on to be a conductor. Well, one of the assistant directors at the time in the Marine Band pulled me aside and said, hey, we watched you conduct on the Marine Band Chamber Series, and we kind of like what we see. Have you ever thought about conducting here in the Marine Band? And you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I thought, I'm not a conductor, I'm a euphonium player. I don't know how to make music without this big hunk of metal in front of me like a shield, And but I also thought this is a wonderful opportunity not only to become a conductor, but also to become involved in the leadership of the Marine Band. Because when you're a conductor, you're also commissioned an officer, and you become part of the leadership structure of the organization. And I'd grown to really love the Marine Band at this point. I mean, all of my friends were in the band. I just loved the history of the organization. I felt like there was so much potential. As great as the band was, I felt like there was so much more that we could do. And so eventually, I was offered the position in 1996 by Colonel Tim Foley, who took over as director after John Bourgeois retired. And Colonel Foley asked if I would become an assistant director with the band. And it took a lot of thought and deliberation, because I loved playing the euphonium. And that decision meant that I was going to have to set the euphonium down to pick up a baton, and also to spend much more time at work in an administrative capacity. So it was really a change not just in career, but in lifestyle. And so it took a lot of thought, but I just realized this was too great an opportunity to pass up. And even though I had doubts about my ability to be a conductor, because I'd only been a part-time conductor up to that point, I thought I've got to give this a shot. And I've never regretted it. As much as I love playing my euphonium, the chance to make music with all of these same great world-class musicians, but now as a conductor, was just absolutely fantastic. So I often tell young people when they're, in high school or even in college and trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, I encourage them to pursue those dreams that they have. My dream was to play euphonium in the Marine Band, and I was lucky. I was able to realize my dream. But what I couldn't envision was where else my career and my life was going to go beyond that, and realizing that initial dream. And so I always encourage students, to develop secondary skill sets, to have other things that they can do, especially things that they enjoy doing. I love to conduct as much as I love to play euphonium. But I didn't know that at the time that I was pursuing that euphonium performance degree with this single idea of playing euphonium professionally. So, like I said, it's important to pursue those goals, but always have backup plans, secondary plans, and be ready for opportunities when they come along. Because if I had just been so tunnel visioned that all I thought about was playing euphonium, I would have missed out on an entirely different chapter of my life. It's not to say that I would have been unhappy, but because I was open to these possibilities and willing to take chances and go in different directions, I was able to add a whole new dimension to my music making and my professional career that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So again, that idea of doggedly pursuing what you want to do, what you love to do, absolutely. If you love it, if you have a passion for it, it's not going to feel as much like work. But don't be so tunnel visioned that you miss out on other opportunities and other possibilities that may come along that you can't even envision when you're 18 or 20 or 25 or 30 or who knows. I mean, I still tell people I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I'm still waiting for that moment. But while I'm waiting to grow up, I've had all these wonderful experiences that I might not have had I been so tunnel visioned that I missed out on them.
Great. Yeah, thank you for those answers. That's some fantastic advice for everyone. The next question I have actually has to do more with each of your virtuosity as euphonium soloists. So if any of you students haven't heard Golden Age of Brass Volume 3, or I think Earle, you've got some CDs out there of your old solos with the Navy Band, and I think after you retired from the Navy Band. Luke, I know I've heard your solos, I think on the internet. I know that I've got a couple CDs of them from various times when you're with the band and outside the band. But if any of you have an opportunity to listen to all three of these gentlemen play solos, it's a phenomenal experience. So the question is what advice, and this is more towards the pedagogical side of things, what advice could you give to euphonium students who want to improve their ability to solo? And this could range the gamut from practice techniques all the way to how to settle your nerves on stage and things like that. But let's start with Dr. Lauder again. Earle, what advice could you give to euphonium students at any level on how to better perform solos in front of an audience? Can we get him unmuted, please?
Excuse me. There. Now, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Earle.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about while you were just going through that introduction is the fact that when I was with the Navy Band and was doing solos with them, Colonel Brendler was the conductor there, and he was the conductor when I came in and to the band, rather. And he had some good advice. And he was kind of stingy with it, though. He wouldn't give you the advice you wanted sometimes. But anyway, one time, I was going to be doing a solo on the concert, and I was backstage getting ready. He came off the stage, as he usually did, and we came on together. And he looked at me, he says, "Tonight, I want you to, when you go out there to the center of the stage, when you go through that door," he said, "I want you to just take a beeline straight out to the middle of that stage, like you own it." And what he was saying was, don't think any doubt in your mind about what's going to happen. Go do it. You're ready for it. You're prepared for it. And don't let your mind slip back and say, what if? Or, well, I don't know for sure. The idea is here that you have to play them with that certain feeling of control and that you're in charge of the solo. Now, in preparing for that, I can recall Mr. Falcone one time put me on the spot. I had been working with him just maybe a week, I think, or so on the Concerto for Trombone by Rimsky-Korsakov, but I was doing it on euphonium. And I had just been working in the lessons, spot working on it. And somehow, when I came into the music building, I always checked the board that said who was going to be playing Thursday on the student recital. Well, I looked up there, and lo and behold, there was my name. And I thought, wait a minute, Mr. Falcone didn't say anything about me playing on student recital at all. So I immediately went right back to his office, and I said, Mr. Falcone, I said, I noticed on the board out front there that I'm listed for Thursday student recital for the Rimsky-Korsakov. And he said, no, he says, I better get up to the office and take care of that. And of course, this was before the days of computers, believe it or not. And so you had to either go to the front office or call them up on the phone, which a lot of times you couldn't get through. But anyway, he said, no, we're going to go do that. And he went over to the door, opened the door, and he took one step out and he stopped. He turned around and he said, you've been working on that, haven't you? I said, yes, sir. I've been putting some time in on myself. And we had never actually played it with an accompaniment. We had not thought about doing it in its continuity. So he said, well, you've been working on that part very well. And he says, let's contact your accompanist, which one had been assigned to me for not the semester, but the quarter. We were on quarters then. And he said, let's do it. And I'm thinking, wow, and I'm shaking in my boots. I'm thinking, no. I said, I don't know that well. And he said, yeah, let's do it. Now, this was on Monday morning. Thursday, I was supposed to perform it. So I called up my accompanist and got her on the spot and told her about it. She was shaking just as much as I was, I believe. But anyway, she said, well, we'll do it. Let's do it. I've been working on my part for you two as well. So we got together late at night. We got together any time during the day that I didn't have a class, very seldom. And so I started working on it. And I thought, well, we'll do the first movement. And Mr. Falcone says, no, you do all the movements. I thought, what? So we did. So I got to work, and I had to say, don't listen to this, university students. I had to skip a few classes in order to work with my accompanist and get this thing ready. Well, and by the way, from memory, he would not let me perform or let any of his students perform using the music. They had to do it from memory. And so I thought, oh my goodness. Well, believe it or not, Thursday afternoon came around. We did it. Why? Because he encouraged me, and I didn't want to let him down. And I just got that attitude again. I'm going to do this, and it worked. That's just one aspect of playing a solo that I want to share with you there. In terms of preparation for it, I have a pretty good memory. This is weird. I've got a good memory for solo work on the euphonium. When it comes to singing, I can't remember words to save my life, but I can remember notes. I can sing the part, and la la and so forth, but I couldn't remember the words. But on my euphonium, I have a quick memory process. Why, I don't know. It just is. Now, you can call it photographic memory. I don't know. Some of it is, some of it isn't. Some of it's the music and what it's saying. Now, in that relationship, I'm going to share another thing with you that has to do with the studio teaching that I just thought of as we've been going along. And that is when a student first walks in my door as a freshman, and I ask them to play what they've prepared, but mostly they have a solo that they used from high school. And I'll have them play that for me. And a lot of times it's very well done. and I'll listen to it, and I'll say, you know what? You don't play euphonium. And they'll look at me with this strange look on their face. And I say, and you know what else? I don't teach euphonium. Now they really look at it. I said, I teach young people to express themselves through the instrument they have in their hand, whether it be trombone, euphonium, tuba, what else? I teach people. I don't teach instrument. And that's the approach that I go to from it. And that is express yourself through that horn.
Wonderful. Thank you. Luke, would you like to give some advice on soloing techniques and what you did to be so successful in that realm?
Yes, I would. There was a point in my life, if I wasn't playing a solo every day, I'd be very depressed. I was a fanatic with solos. But anytime, give you an example, by playing all these solos that you enjoy playing, most of what I played, I had memorized. And I found that once you memorize a solo, you have command of the solo. If you don't have it, you have to read the music. You don't have the confidence at the time. Right now, at my age, I have to pick up some solo music. I probably use the music because I don't have the confidence. You have the performance anxiety as you get older. Not like Earle, he's still kicking like wildfire. But yeah, I think you should memorize. If you memorize a piece, you have command of the piece. And that started when I was in the band, and Colonel Chopin would come out, Spiros, yes, sir. Next week you're playing Hungarian melodies. I said, what's that? You go to the library and get it. So go upstairs, I bring it home, take sections at a time. The intro, the cadenzas, each piece at a time, playing sometimes 36 times over and over again. And the reason I did it, I didn't like the way I played them. And I recorded everything that I practiced. And I'd listen to my recordings. And I was always my own worst critic. It was never good enough for me, but that's how I did it. I memorized my solos. Unless I was going to a band camp or one of many clinics, I'd take my Belstead books or my Clark books and my Sen, all kinds of things. If they wanted to hear a solo, I'd run through 5 or 6 solos on stage using the music. That's totally different. It's not being a paid performer. But to be perfect at a solo, I think you need to memorize it. Once it's memorized, you have total command of the solo. And you don't have to worry about music blowing away or anything else. You don't have to think of it. When you memorize something you love playing, you're not even thinking of the notes. You just go out in front of the audience, you look out on stage, everything is black. You don't even see the audience, and you just play it. That's my advice on practicing a solo.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Colonel Colburn, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just a couple more thoughts on this. One of the things that I've encountered with musicians that I've taught and that I've dealt with and worked with is the realization that I think especially for a lot of young players, they look forward to a day when they don't feel nervous anymore. They think, once I've done this enough, once I'm experienced enough, I'm just not going to get nervous. It's going to feel like I'm just playing at home. And I think for most people, there's always going to be some level of anxiety. Just standing up in front of any crowd to play something, you're going to feel butterflies. You're going to feel some anxiety. And that's okay. I think rather than waiting for the day when you're going to have none of those feelings, you need to learn to kind of recognize and accept those feelings and not be scared by them. But that feeling of adrenaline and excitement, and it manifests itself in different people different ways. I think it's more important to just acknowledge and understand, oh yeah, that's right, that's the way I feel when I'm playing a solo. And so learning to accept some of those feelings, and I've heard world-class actors, athletes, conductors, musicians all say the same thing. They always get nervous. Every class I teach, every rehearsal that I conduct, I always am a little anxious before I stand up there in front of the group and start talking. But then once I start doing it, I settle in and I'm just fine. So some of it, I think, is learning to accept those feelings and learning to kind of process them. And then something else that I think is really helpful is the process of kind of imagining yourself in that setting. If you've got a solo coming up, if you, if you can practice that solo on the stage, if you can just imagine yourself in that space doing that activity before it happens, then when you step out there, it's not going to feel so foreign. It's not going to feel so new. If you've spent some time really just mentally imagining yourself doing this activity ahead of time, when you're that last practice, that last run through with the solo, close your eyes and imagine yourself in that performance space. And then when it comes time to walk out there in front of the audience on the stage in that spot, there's going to be a little bit of that kind of deja vu feeling that is going to be somewhat reassuring. You're going to feel like, oh, I have been here. I've done this before. And so those are just a couple of thoughts and techniques that I found to be helpful for myself and for my students.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, all three of you, for these fantastic thoughts, your experience as legendary performers with the Euphonium. And again, as I said in the beginning, in the intro, some of you younger students may not understand how much of a debt we owe these three gentlemen. But to speak for my generation and, of course, the generation after me, we thank each of you for the fantastic careers and the artistic excellence that you guys have brought to this instrument. And I can tell you personally that each of you have affected my life as a student and as a professional, and for that I appreciate it. We've got 2 minutes left, so I thought what we could do is just end on a fun note. If each of you will just say quickly what your favorite Golden Age solo is, we'll end the meeting on that note. Earle, would you like to start? What's your favorite Golden Age solo? And can we unmute him, please?
Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, it's kind of hard to pick, man. There's so many of them, but the one that I performed the most and felt like I could express myself through the most was "Believe Me If All Is Enduring and Charms." Yeah. It's just one of those things that just comes to me even right now. I mean, I'm envisioning the performance as Colburn said. Yes.
Well, and if any of you have ever heard Earle's performance of that, there's a couple recordings of that. It's absolutely phenomenal. With the Navy.
Thank you.
Luke, what's your favorite Golden Age solo?
My favorite Golden Age solo was the Boccolari, Fantasia di Concerto.
Yep. Fantastic piece.
I can really express the way I feel when I play that.
Yeah. Talk about Italian melody.
I love it. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And Colonel, what's your favorite?
I will tell you my favorite in just a second, but two quick stories I want to share. One is that I forgot to mention that when I showed up for that Marine Band audition, the person proctoring the audition was none other than Luke Spiros. So I felt like I'd made this complete circle. The first professional euphonium player was also the proctor for my audition. And also, Mark, to back up, one of the best decisions I ever made as director of the Marine Band was hiring you. So that is one of the things I'm most proud of. And my favorite solo is Mantia's Auld Lang Syne Variations. It's the first solo I did with the Marine Band, as a matter of fact, and it's actually the first recording on my Golden Age of Brass recording as well. It's just one that I've always loved.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming to this class. I think we've all been really enriched by these answers. If you have any other questions for me or any of the panelists, go ahead and shoot emails to the tech moderators on Slack, and we'll try to get those messages to our guests. And everyone just enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much. Signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.